Welcome back, focused learners. In this explainer, we're unpacking a massive shift in modern cybersecurity, demystifying passwordless authentication in PAN-OS Orion. Look, if you've ever felt that absolute pit-in-your-stomach dread of a compromised credential alert, or if you're just totally exhausted by the endless cycle of password resets, well, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we're going to look exactly at how PAN-OS Orion handles modern cryptographic authentication to literally eliminate the password from your attack surface.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the end of passwords, move into the passwordless ecosystem, then check out the architecture in PAN-OS, look at some advanced use cases, walk through the configuration workflow, and wrap it all up with diagnosis and troubleshooting.
Section 1. The end of passwords. Let's talk about the core problem.
Let's just validate a struggle literally every IT professional deals with on a daily basis. I mean, you build these absolute fortresses around your networks. You deploy the latest firewalls, you set up insanely strict policies, and yet the whole perimeter can just crumble because a user decided to reuse their pet's name with a 123 at the end. Passwords are this massive legacy anchor dragging down modern security. Just look at this data. Almost half of all publicly reported security incidents directly involve compromised passwords. Half. And why? Because fundamentally a password is something you know. And if you know it, it can be guessed, it can be phished, or it can be stolen. It's a shared secret that's always going to be vulnerable to human error.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, hold on, we use multi-factor authentication, and that's great, but attackers have evolved, right? Traditional MFA is getting bypassed. Attackers are using man-in-the-middle attacks to intercept sessions, they're pulling off SIM swapping, or they're just exploiting human psychology with MFA fatigue. Bombarding a user with prompts until they just click approve out of sheer annoyance so their phone stops buzzing. Passwordless authentication entirely flips the script. It relies on cryptographic identities with zero shared secrets. No secrets, no phishing. It's inherently phishing resistant, and honestly, it gives your users a vastly superior, streamlined experience. It really is the definitive solution.
Moving on to Part 2, the passwordless ecosystem.
To really grasp how PAN-OS implements this, we need to zoom out for a second. Passwordless authentication isn't some proprietary magic trick cooked up in a lab. It is a robust ecosystem built on incredibly secure, open industry standards, and the absolute bedrock of that is FIDO2. FIDO2 ensures the whole authentication process is secure, standardized, interoperable, and most importantly, completely resistant to phishing. It completely replaces the old concept of typing in a password with strong, hardware-backed public key cryptography.
Next up is WebAuthn. You could basically think of WebAuthn as the critical bridge that actually makes FIDO2 usable on the internet. It's the standard API built into all the major web browsers today. When a user tries to log in, WebAuthn is the thing allowing the browser to securely talk to the underlying operating system and request that public key-based authentication, whether that's reading a fingerprint, doing facial recognition, or checking a passkey natively on the device. And finally, we have CTAP, which stands for the Client to Authenticator Protocol. So if WebAuthn handles the browser side of things, CTAP handles the external hardware. If your users are carrying physical security keys, like a USB token or an NFC card, CTAP is the protocol that lets that external device securely chat with the browser to prove, hey, this is really me. So together, FIDO2, WebAuthn, and CTAP make up the ecosystem that eliminates the need for passwords entirely.
All right, Section 3, Architecture in PAN-OS. Let's see how this works under the hood.
Now that we've got the global standards down, let's zoom in on how PAN-OS Orion actually enforces them within your firewall to secure network traffic. So the crucial point here is right on the screen. The private key never leaves the device. I really want you to internalize that because it's the cryptographic heart of the whole passwordless concept. Think about a password. It's a shared secret that gets blasted across the internet to a server. A private key? That is generated locally and stays on the user's trusted hardware forever. The server only ever gets the public key, which means we are mathematically eliminating the risk of server-side credential leaks. Boom.
The PAN-OS architecture elegantly maps this entire process out across 3 distinct layers. First up, you have the user or device layer. This is where the user actually presents their biometric gesture or their passkey. Next is the identity provider or IDP layer. The IDP acts as the ultimate authority here, validating that cryptographic identity without ever seeing a password. And finally, the application layer. The application grants the access based on the IDP's token, while your PAN-OS firewall is sitting there perfectly positioned as the enforcement point.
It's acting like the bouncer, ensuring that only verified, context-aware traffic actually reaches your critical apps.
Section 4. Advanced use cases. Let's talk about the real world.
So it's one thing to use passwordless authentication for fancy modern web apps that already speak these modern protocols. But let's be real, enterprise networks are messy. We've got a wild mix of cloud apps, on-premise servers, and ancient legacy systems that have been running for a decade. While PAN-OS Orion expands the architecture to handle pretty much all of it. First, it seamlessly supports IDP-managed SaaS apps through standard SSO. Easy. Second, it brings passwordless capabilities to traditional internal Kerberos environments, which is a huge deal for modernizing your on-prem network. But the absolute hero feature here, that third bullet, legacy and custom apps via the identity gateway. Basically, PAN-OS acts as an intermediary proxy. It performs the modern passwordless check up front, and then it passes the authenticated user context back to legacy apps that have literally no idea what FIDO2 even is. You are securing outdated apps without having to rewrite a single line of code. Incredible.
Moving on to Section 5, Configuration Workflow. How do we actually build this? The concepts are fantastic, right? But you need to know how to actually implement this in the real world. Luckily, PAN-OS structures this in a very logical, step-by-step way. We can group the whole 7-step configuration workflow into 3 main phases. Phase 1 is your foundational Kerberos and delegation setup. That means defining your servers, setting up delegation profiles, and enabling constrained delegation so the firewall can securely act on the user's behalf. Then, Phase 2 moves into policy. You'll create custom URL categories and define your URL-based authentication policies. And finally, Phase 3. This is where the real magic happens. HTTP header insertion. This is where the firewall actually injects the verified user identity straight into the HTTP headers, effortlessly passing that authorization down to those legacy applications we just talked about. It's a really slick workflow.
Finally, Section 6, Diagnosis and Troubleshooting.
Look, we all know things don't always go perfectly in IT. When a user calls the help desk because they can't access an application, PAN-OS gives you granular visibility to find the exact point of failure in that passwordless chain. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it divides your troubleshooting workflow right at the command line. You have distinct commands for the management plane versus the data plane. For example, if you suspect an issue with the firewall talking to your identity provider, or maybe a hiccup handling Kerberos delegation, you're going to troubleshoot the management plane. But if the issue is more about whether a specific user's IP is currently mapped correctly, or if they have an active session with the right group policies applied, you're jumping straight into the data plane commands. It's a highly practical, super fast, quick reference for your help desk team. Now, beyond the CLI, your logs are your absolute best friends here. There are 3 crucial logs you'll want to monitor. System logs give you the full, high-level view of what's happening. Session logs are absolutely vital for associating specific users with actual network traffic. But the real heavyweight here, that's the offd.log. This log provides incredibly deep details into the authentication and authorization process. And here's a pro tip to remember. Even when your Kerberos tickets are heavily cached to speed things up, the offd process continues to record local events. That means you always have a precise, unbroken trail for your analysis.
So, we've covered the fatal flaws of passwords, the robust open standards that are finally replacing them, and exactly how PAN-OS Orion orchestrates this entire architecture to secure everything from your modern SaaS tools to those super rigid legacy applications. By completely eliminating the shared secret, you fundamentally remove the single most exploited attack vector in cybersecurity today. So, I'll leave you with this provocative question to consider for your own environment. Is your network ready for a passwordless future? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.